right, let's move on to Gloria Masters. Hey, Gloria, thank you very much for coming on. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's 5:30 a.m. here in wonderful New Zealand,
Oh my goodness.
Aotearoa.
Well, we really appreciate you getting up and spending time with us, and this is just such an important story for people to hear. Just a quick disclaimer, because of YouTube community guidelines and stuff like that. If you are averse to hearing a harrowing story of things that have happened to Gloria as a child, then perhaps this is not for you. Otherwise, be prepared. It's a very important story, but it's going to get dark, and there's going to be some graphic content. So that's my disclaimer out of the way. I've gone over these 8 pages that you've sent to me, Gloria. We salute you, and it's really brave what you're doing. Can you just tell the viewers a little bit about you, and how your life started?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, thanks for hosting me, Sean. Really appreciate it. Welcome to your viewers. So, look, I was born into a family where child sex transporting was kind of considered the norm. So, for the first 16 years of my life, I was trained and conditioned by my abusers, predominantly my father, antithesis of what that actually means for all the wonderful dads out there, to actually perform in many varying ways and through many different venues. So, I was leased to gangs. I was performing in a strip club up in our red light district in Auckland. I was transported to various working men's clubs throughout New Zealand and the North Island. I had forced abortions on me as a result of what I went through. To be honest, Sean, just really grateful I made it through. And decades and decades of therapy, which is why the hair's white, and I'm now ready to give back.
Gloria, what was your life like before all of this started to happen?
This was my life
What's
from the
your very
time I was born up
Oh
until I was
God.
16 years of age. Yeah.
What are your first memories then?
So, one of my first memories was of being a small child, probably about 3 years of age. And I'm sure the UK had them as well, Sean, but being locked into or put into an apple crate, the old-fashioned apple crates, and having another one nailed down on top of me and being left in there for hours for some misdemeanor or other. So that was as a small child. I was first raped. Am I allowed to say that word on the show?
So let's say assaulted.
Oh, okay.
At
Assaulted.
this point in time of your story, whose care were you under? Was this your natural parents that you were under the care
Yeah,
of them?
yeah, yeah. So my father, but these are my biological parents. My father was my key abuser and fed into some very big paedophile rings in New Zealand at the time. So we're going back to the 1960s, early 70s.
Okay, I've also got
The
I've got a restriction on me by the police in the UK now, whereby they've required me to
oh
ask all guests who've got stories of this nature to confirm that they waive their anonymity because of the nature of this.
yes,
You do
yeah,
waive your anonymity, Gloria. Okay,
yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. And, look, I've
Yeah,
written a book about this. Really to kind of shine the light on this, which is huge in our country and across the world, as we know. It's what I call the silent endemic, and really we need to start exposing this and have more conversations so we
definitely,
can help our fellow survivors out there.
definitely.
There's a lot of us out there, Sean.
So, all right. So you've kind of like, when usually when we interview people, it starts out with telling them, a bit of the background and stuff, but your
Yep,
earliest memories are these horrific abuse. So just to set
yep.
the stage a bit more, then, could you perhaps describe about your parents, who they were, what kind of jobs they had, how they met, just so people could get a greater understanding of how this came together?
Certainly. I believe it was generational because my father's mother and one of his sisters were tasked with teaching me the art of seduction. So that as a 6-year-old, when I first started being sexually transported out to people, I knew what I was doing. So there was a commission money-based um, transaction that went on for my grandmother and my auntie at the time. So that was quite devastating to me because that auntie was one of my favourites. My father was a plumber back in the day, um, average working men class. This was the era where men went out to work and women stayed at home with children. My mother did not seem to um, like me very much or indeed welcome being a mum. And I think at that time it was really hard because, big Catholic family and not a lot of support. But nevertheless, if you think of classic narcissist, and my father I would consider to be a psychopath, actually, then yeah, there is the environment, if you like, where neglect and abandonment find a home. Abuse is always present. So
What about siblings?
yes, so I was the youngest girl. My siblings would rather this never saw the light of day, do not agree with my telling of the story, uh, did not suffer what I did because at the age of 11, my parents decided to separate and I was left in the house with my father for 18 months. And that was without a doubt the very worst time of my life and the abuse that I suffered. Mm.
All right. So,
Yep.
picking up where we left off, then you said your earliest
Yes.
memories were of these things happening, and you were
Yeah.
born into a family of transporters, and
Yes.
it just progressively got worse.
Yes. Yeah. I think the most scary time or times for me were being leased to gangs over weekends and for specific events. So being a young, underweight child and deliberately kept underweight, so food was a very big luxury for me growing up. It was, yeah, fairly pretty frightening and traumatic. And, again, just grateful to have made it through, but also highlighting that this does go on in New Zealand. This has not changed in New Zealand. And we have people alongside the UK and America where this is known to be going on and nothing really changes. So I'm
Okay,
one of the people who wants to shed light on this.
what
Yeah.
were the nature of these gangs, and how did that come about?
Well, because my father was involved in several abuser rings, I can't say the actual term, um, because of that, it meant he met a great deal of people. So when one of the gangs who was connected with one of the clubs in New Zealand came in, he was able to say, well, look, I can provide this child to you. So yes, yeah.
So were these biker gangs, or what type
Yes,
of
yeah,
gangs?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Biker gangs, and
Big
and
gangs
you
still existing today. There were only 3 gangs in New Zealand back in those days. Um, yeah.
and then what happened when you ended up with the gang?
Okay, I don't know how graphic you want me to get, but
We got to just be
base,
careful how we phrase things.
yeah,
Definitely, yeah.
yeah, certainly. So look, I guess the interesting thing about that was because I was so young and scared, I was just shaking, and I chose not to look these big, scary men in the eye. So they put me on the block, which is a typical gang um, ceremony or initiation that they undergo, which is hands and feet tied to four corners of a table, and then they would get into a line and just have a go.
Oh my God.
So yeah, and I would be.
How did you block that out, like mentally?
Oh, look, to be honest, and survivors know this. Um, it's dissociation, Sean. You cannot stay in your body and experience that. You will have heard that many times on your show, I'm sure. But yeah, dissociation was my best friend through those years. I was also drugged and made to drink a lot at the time. So for me, partly they just found it was easier if I had been given mind altering drugs or some type of alcohol so that I wasn't so so difficult for them to abuse.
As a young, skinny kid, did you think that this could have, you could have not survived? Perhaps you could have died?
Oh, well, that's yeah, many times. Really scary, really scary. To be fair, the biggest monster in my life, and I call him that in my book, it was my father. So he would come up with varying other additional forms of abuse and torture, actually, because that meant in a sick abuser world, beginning with P, the P groups, um, they were, you see, they'd pay more money if there were different acts added. So I was trained very well by my grandmother and by my auntie. And I learned actually, Sean, one of the things we do as a trauma response is, the fight, flight, freeze. Well, there's a fourth one, and it's called fawn. And I learned actually to fawn. So I would try and attract the eye of a gentler kind of pedophile, believe it or not. Uh, and sometimes that would appeal because they didn't necessarily want to hurt me as badly. So for a lot of these men and women abusers as well, we need to not just have this on men. They were, I could perhaps in my own childlike way gain some control. I know that seems laughable, but it was all I had. I had to survive, so I found some ways to do that.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
like trying to get the situation reduced slightly, wouldn't it? By finding someone who wasn't going to be. So, okay, so
quite so violent.
you were born into this then, and it's absolute hell.
Yeah.
And how, um, you've got this survival mechanism that's kicking in, but was there a sense that because you were born into it, you didn't understand how abnormal it was?
Yeah, and I think you've coined that. Yeah, I I thought that was normal, except for the threats of death and absolute horror if I ever spoke of it. So to me, it was normal because it was an everyday abhorrent occurrence, and I think if I hadn't been able to find something to kind of have as a support for me, which was no living person, just to reiterate, there was no one in my life, no safe adult. Um, so I kind of turned inward actually, and I found little angels around me as a child, and I think that kept me sane,
You said
really.
there were several times that you were under threat of death. What
Yeah.
situations had arose to cause it to climax like that to the point where they were threatening to kill you?
Well, there were times where these abusers were so drunk or so off their faces with drugs that they didn't always know quite what they were doing. And there were times where my father, in particular, would beat me so savagely using, it was the old-fashioned big beer bottles back in the day, and kind of attacking me with that, and your viewers will fill in the rest. That and then leave me there, so I could be lying outside all night or tied up like a dog out on the back deck all night, and he would come out in the morning and forget, or what the F are you doing there? I'm not sure what I can say on your show,
Yeah,
but
just keep
what
it.
are you, yeah, what are you doing there? Why are you making a fool of yourself? And I think, oh my gosh, you tried to run me over in the car last night, and he couldn't remember. So we're talking severe psychopath, we're talking abuse, torture, absolute psychological torture.
Did any outsiders try to intervene in your favour? Were the hospitalizations, doctors, nurses, social services, police at any point?
This was the time in New Zealand, and New Zealand was always a wee bit behind other countries. Sorry, fellow Kiwis, but it's true in this type of thing. You see, it was in the 1980s before police got involved in another man's business. So what I mean by that is, for instance, with domestic violence in New Zealand, police would not willingly knock on a door and get involved, because that was considered a man's home was his castle.
So
So
they took a long,
I
took
used
a,
to stay at school as long as I could. I never wanted to come home. In that time that I was left in my father's house at the age of 11, I had no other family around me, so I would hide at school. I would hide in the toilets. I would hide on the school grounds, and the nuns would come out. They would always find me, and they would always make me go home. But no one ever asked any questions. No one ever wondered why. Um,
what about school
and
teachers or friends you had at school? Were they wondering what was going on?
well, we're talking late 60s, early 70s. No, people didn't get involved. And to be fair, and it's true today, I believe, if you stand a child and an adult in front of people asking questions, the adults will always believe the other adults. So it's true. Children are not believed if there's an adult standing there saying the opposite.
Okay.
I'm sure people were concerned, but no one got involved, and it was particularly scary for me during that time when my mother and sisters left, and I was left in my father's care, because my brother, who was 4 years older, was also part of the abuse, and so he and his friends would join in the games as well. It was great fun to them.
Oh my God.
Um, and look, Sean, you can't go through something this big and escape or emerge unscathed. So I didn't. It's taken me decades actually to come to a place of healing and peace. And the reason I wanted to talk to you was to expose this more and more, so that we can actually hand the shame back and get people some help and support out there. You're not alone out there. There are many, many of us.
Yeah, the only way we can get this remedied is by shining a light on the issue, which is
Yeah.
prevalent everywhere,
Yes.
and highlighting what these people are up to so that we can get them properly prosecuted and incarcerated. So if you, just for the viewers then that have joined the stream, we're speaking to Gloria Masters. It is a harrowing story. Gloria was born into a family of human transporters. And so far, she's talked about abuse from the family members, from being transported out to gangs. And the next part of the story is that they then started to use you in a gentleman's club and pornographic movies. Do you want to expand on those, please?
Yeah, look, and I'd love to say the name of this club. I've been advised legally not to.
Yeah,
It's
let's not
it's
because
one of the biggest groups in the world.
they'll
Actually, they're
have the
well
video
known for this.
they'll have the video shut
Yep.
down if we
You
use
know,
any
I
names.
can't
Yeah,
use
yeah.
them, but
Okay.
they are well known to everybody globally. So this particular group used to have a monthly meeting, and depending on where you were in the hierarchy within that group, you had access to children that were brought to these various places for them. There was quite a symbolism, quite a ceremonial type activities. I can't really go into detail, but
Stay away from that.
yeah, fair enough. Anyway, but that went on, and as a result of that, there were, I have to say, there were police that knew of this. Pretty sure we're talking fairly high in our political system at the time as well. This is not new across the world either, I believe. But we had that, so that was something that went on. Pictures and back in the day, they weren't videos; they were the big old projector reels and the big old whirring machines. I remember them vividly. But the nightclub and the strip club they leased me out of, I was hidden away in an upstairs room, but it had a main stage where other women at the time would dance and perform and cavort for the male punters. So it wasn't really too far from then before images and filming would begin. I was in well over 100 of these. I believe police think they may have reached the States. The reality is they couldn't find them. Look, some of them could be stored here still in New Zealand, although we know we've now moved to not just video, but much more comprehensive digital imaging and pornographic material of children. So look, they're out there. That was terrible. They used to make me drink things. There were other children involved at times. It was always just a nightmare, really, as you would imagine. And again, I would try and sidle up to or attract the attention of a gentler, softer-natured abuser, because I was hoping that then maybe I wouldn't get too badly hurt.
So you're saying that there was kids and adults in these movies with you?
Some of the time, yes. Some of the time it was just me dancing and performing. Some of the time it was other children and having to perform on other children and children having to perform on me, which, makes me feel like throwing up. So I can only imagine for you guys out there.
Okay.
But they're out there. The images are out there. The so-called movies are out there. And very well connected, I think, in our country were these abusers and these groups of abusers to have got away with, and still goes on today. So, there are many people out there who aren't just responsible for these acts, but actually we have the gatekeepers around them, we have the secret keepers, we have the people who are aware of what it does go on. And so for people like me, finding our voices, it's really important because it means that we can start normalizing a conversation, not the acts, never the acts, but the conversation, because we have to We have to stop this. And we can only do it if the silence is gone.
So it sounds like what you're describing as a kind of food chain that they're working you upwards and then managing to monetize you more
Yes.
into heavier
Yeah.
activity, abuse activity.
Yeah.
And by the time it's got to the movie level, then, that's, we're well aware that the market for that stuff is in the many millions, if not the billions a year. So a lot of money was being made from this. It sounds very well organized.
Yes. I think huge money in this, huge money in this. My father got one of the first 4 Pontiacs in New Zealand through the money he made out of me. So, yeah, very lucrative business, this sex transporting that goes on, a huge money earner,
And you're
huge
saying
money
that you're
earner,
saying that it's
human.
people's discomfort that allows this cycle to continue.
I believe so. Look, I've got lots of people here in this country that love me a lot, uh, but they don't want to hear about it. It's uncomfortable for people, and they're just uncomfortable because they don't know what to say. Um, on the other side of the coin, there's these fantastic survivors globally who, we stand beside each other in solidarity, actually, and we support each other's voices because, Sean, what keeps us silent is the shame. And the shame is enabled by people who aren't comfortable. Can you see how the cycle then continues? So, for those of us that have undergone this, do you really need to talk about it, Gloria? I want to expose it. Yes.
Was it's never going to
Let's,
stop, is it? If people don't speak out, it will never stop.
yeah, it will never stop. So, look, there's hope out there, but we have to stop the enablers. I'd love to set up a global campaign actually where you can see as you drive past a billboard in every major country in the world, speak out. You're not alone. The shame never belonged to you. Because that's what keeps us quiet, as well as people who struggle with this being true. And I'm not saying that they don't believe, I'm saying that they don't want to. Spot the difference?
Yeah, it's such a dark thing.
Yeah.
So, how many years have you been speaking out about it? And are people who are trapped in these situations reaching out to you?
Yeah, so I've been speaking about this much more prolifically in the last 3.5 years. Um, Unfortunately, we don't really have funding to do anything here. But nevertheless, I've set up a podcast called Handing the Shame Back, where every week I interview survivors from Aotearoa across the world, and very, very humbled actually to have people on the show to share their stories. You see, the thing is, every time one of us speaks out, the shame gets lessened. We need to hand the shame back to the abusers because it never belonged to us. It needs to go straight back to the abusers. And we need people to feel comfortable with speaking about this, because the reality is, the police tell me here in New Zealand, the stats are up to 1 in 3 adults. Think about that.
I know, and the authorities are spending all this money locking kids up for weed, and they're telling us they don't have the resources to go after these people. The whole justice system is upside down. But what do you think then? Say someone is concerned that a young person is going through this. What kind of signs should the public look for?
Yeah, so look, some of the kids you're talking about that are getting locked up, we know that in our prisons, a lot of these younger adolescents or adolescents and young adults actually have been the victims of child sexual abuse. So there's a little bit of an equation there, and I believe that the signs are anything that is kind of other extreme. So in my case, I was overtly, frantically trying to get attention without saying the words. So I was very naughty at school. Why was I naughty? Because it was safe. It was my one safe place. If I was naughty, I was noticed. If I was noticed, I was seen. If I was seen, I was someone, not something. When you are transported for sexual advantage to groups who don't give a rat's about you, rather their own sexual gratification, you are an object. In my parents' case, I was an object. To be at school, to be naughty, was to be seen. Yay, someone saw me, I must be a person. So, a long-winded answer to your question, but any behaviours that are extreme, acting out, behaviour that has changed. So it might be someone that was relatively shy but actually withdrew completely. Anything that is extreme or changing, has changed a behaviour, is really worth a conversation. Because children are conditioned, and as adult survivors, we are conditioned to STFU, shut the up. We don't speak, and we take that very seriously on threat of death, and a lot of survivors will relate to that. But for our children and young people, that won't have changed. So I guess one of the ways that I like to connect with young people is actually handing them a bit of paper. They may not be able to speak, but they can write.
Did you try to escape, and how did you get out of the situation eventually?
Yeah, many times tried to escape, always brought back, always brought
Could you
back.
describe some of those times just to take us there?
Yeah, so there was one night at my father's home, and he had a sex party. So the men would arrive and they would pay a fee. I would be in a bedroom getting ready and getting drugged. So that when I came out, they would have a number. They would choose a number, or they would pay and then pick a number out of the glass, and whoever got first got me first. And there were different rates for, normal sex, sodomy, or two at a time, however they wanted it. But the rates would change accordingly. And one night this just went on and on. And I realised at that time I didn't know if I could take much more. So there were several times in that beautiful little girl that I was life where I felt I just couldn't continue. So one night they'd all kind of fallen into some sort of drunken or drugged haze, and I managed to crawl out of the room, and I just climbed into someone's boot. I opened their boot and got into their car and just stayed in there, because then they couldn't find me. Then they couldn't do anything. And that person, of course, drove home at some point, and I was in the car, and it wasn't till the next day they discovered me, and I thought, yay. I know it sounds odd, but yay, I might be safe. This person may not take me back home. No, they took me back home. And I also ran to my mother's house, which was something like 4.5 kilometres away. I would hide under her house and try to escape, but I was always taken back. The way I escaped was at the age of 12.5, I came home one day to hear laughter coming from the bedroom, and my father was in there with another woman, and that completely threw me because that had been my role. I was just quite confused but quite devastated. Ran to my mother's house for the first time. She listened to me and asked what was going on. I told her he was with a woman, Well, that was it. She was on the phone to the priest, the archbishop. She knew someone of that ilk in New Zealand. And they said, and this saved my life, I tell you now, get her out of that house. It's not safe to be there in the company of an adulterer. I'll let that sink in. Fine for me to be there in the company of a psychopathic terrorist, but not fine for me to be there. Anyway, got me out of that house. Oh, couldn't believe the relief, only to be told that the bishop and the judge had decided I would have to go back every second weekend. Can I tell you, that felt harder. Safe for 12 days, back to hell for 2. The child that walked back to my mother's after those 2 days was never the same child that arrived. At the age of, so this continued until I was 16, I could not leave my father's kind of, not custody, but visitation rights were ensured until I was 16. The day I turned 16, I never had to willingly see him again, so I didn't. Yeah.
So that was the end of it at 16.
At 16. So then, of course, you can imagine after that sort of, I was a complete wreck. And it's taken me decades, I'm 61 now, and proud of who I am now. I've emerged. I'm here, I'm handing back, trying to help other people, give some hope. Guys, hang in there.
So you must have had then serious PTSD at 16. A lot of people that we've interviewed that have had things happen of this nature have then turned to drugs to self-medicate. Was that the case with you, or alcohol?
Yeah, it's interesting. To be honest, because I was given so many barbiturates as a kid and teenager, it frightened me to go there. But what I did, my biggest damage, my biggest trauma was I was this false self. I just wasn't real. So who you saw, who the neighbour saw, or who the school saw was not really who I was. So think of putting on a mask at a ball. That's who I was to the world. On the inside, I was a complete, chaotic, traumatized, false wreck. I was acting in my life. I wasn't living my life. So there's lots and lots of damage, and took me decades and decades and decades. And I made it through, and I'm just so grateful that I did. And really, it's a horror show. My story's being compared to that of the Holocaust by someone who interviewed me last year. The reality is I don't need the attention. What I need is to use that as a platform to get some help for our 1 in 3 out across the world, because this is a silent endemic. We need to stand beside each other. We need to get some things going. I'm actually writing a guide at the moment, Sean, a book, Child Sexual Abuse Guide to Recovery, because I want to give back. I want people to feel there's a way through.
Could we just
go back?
Could we just go back to your way through a bit then?
Yeah.
So from age 16 to 20, then,
Yeah.
whose care were you in? Who were you living with? What was your life like during that period?
At 16 to 20.
Yeah.
So look, I left home as soon as I could, because I had no faith in my mother at all. It was enabling 101. So I went flatting, but of course I ended up in people's lives that I should never have been. I was conditioned, you see, we have a template. I was conditioned to attract more abuse, people who didn't rate me, and always being the carer. I'd adopted that role. So that is what I did. I engaged in behaviour that was really counterproductive. I attracted the wrong people to me. I acted out. I guess for me, as I say, interestingly, I smoked too much. I probably drank too much. But the big thing for me was I didn't know who I was. So I was playing a role or acting a part in my own life. And you know, I'm amazed. I passed exams at school. I tried to get into teachers training college, and I was 20 years old before I got to do that. And I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud of that, because part of the brain shuts down through the trauma. So you talk about PTSD, there's so many other things. For survivors, you know, things like hypervigilance, you're always looking behind, who's ahead, how can I get out, where's my exit, how can we make sure that I can keep this person happy to distract them enough. You know, there's all of that stayed with me, highly anxious, highly stressed, highly skilled actually at keeping everyone else happy. Why? Because it kept me safe. Just because the 16 years had ended didn't mean there weren't to be another 16, 20, 30 years of healing, as you would expect.
Totally. So as you're acting
Yeah,
out understandably from 16 to 20. As you matured into your 20s then,
yeah.
did that calm down, or was it another chaotic decade?
Uh, Look, it was chaos. No fault of my ex-husband. I'm being very generous here. But of course I attracted not a good fit for me, or not someone who respected or valued me. I had two beautiful children in my early 30s. The memories resurfaced during that time as a mother. So that was a whole other hell unto itself. Marriage ended shortly thereafter. But yeah, I think there were many, many things in my life at that time as well. I dared to tell the truth and take it to my mother. Her initial response was, "You have no right to tell anyone about this."
Oh my goodness. All right, so you had two children, you said in your 30s,
Yeah,
which, is something that most
yeah,
people, most families, mothers, that's going to be one of the highlights of their life. But you
yeah.
said triggered, it brought things to the surface, did it?
Yes,
And
yeah.
was those things being brought to the surface? Was that then sow the seeds of the breakdown of the relationship?
No, the relationship was never going to work, Sean, because I sort of attracted that to me, which I felt I was. I had no self-worth, no self-esteem at all, so I couldn't possibly attract someone who might value me. That would have been counterproductive or bizarre. Sorry, what was the other part of your question?
So you talked about how, you had two children in your 30s, and most people imagine that's
Yeah.
going to be the highlight of a
Oh,
person's
yes. Yeah.
life. But then it got dark because the memories were activated. Could you give a bit more detail about how it turned around like that on you?
Yeah. So look, having children, what a gift, and I was so blessed. I decided at the age of 11 I was going to be a really good mum. I know that sounds bizarre, and I was. I probably went too far the other way. So I was able to parent my children to the best of my ability. They know they're very loved. They tell me, I'm really in their faces, aren't you, Mum? Yes, I am. And I'm proud of that, Sean, because really I had no role modelling for how to be a parent. What wasn't quite so good was the trauma. The memories were coming at me 1,000 miles an hour. And if you can imagine 16 years of this trauma, there wasn't one or two. These were horrendous. And there was a lot of somatic stuff emerging as well. So with memory and recall, as survivors know, we get flashbacks, and we might get taste. I might see someone walking towards me and think, oh my God, that's my father. Can't be, he's dead. But there's lots of that can come into our heads. And I think for me at that time, the trauma of trying to deal with what was servicing and parent two small children alone was, look, it nearly broke me at times, I have to say. I had the love and support of good friends around me, and I ended up going in once again and finding some spiritual, relief. And I had a great lawyer, GP, psychologist at the time, and they were all amazing. The police at the time, they did do an investigation once the memories had resurfaced, and that they were pretty good as well, and said they would never have had a chance. Never have doubted putting me on the stand because I was a very credible witness. But they just didn't have the burden of proof because it was one word against many others.
All right, so you're going through a period of these memories coming back. Your relationship is breaking down, and you've
Yeah.
got two kids now to take care of. How
Yeah.
how did you rebuild from that?
Well, it was hard. It was me or me, and you got to remember I was conditioned to only rely on myself. I had no one as a youngster, so it was very hard actually for me to reach out and ask for help from others. But I slowly rebuilt through several things, really. I had a therapist, so I was seeing someone regularly. I had good friends in my life. I was a runner, so I used to run. And that helped me as well because the dissociation would kick in. I had my children who were beautiful, but also a little bit triggering because, of course, they were small and I was small when all this began. So, yeah, I needed lots and lots of help. I played netball, which I loved. I'd play it today. The mind says yes, the knees say bugger off. But at the end of the day, there were many, many things. I had I turned to the teachings of Wayne Dwyer and Louise Hay. Love them or hate them, but they certainly helped my life at that time. And there are many, many people out there who have been helped through this. So spirituality was a big thing, has become bigger in my life. Writing it down really helped. Every night I'd sit up and write. I'd think I'd be waiting for my son to wake so I could breastfeed him. And I'd think, oh, well, I'll just journal. And I think he'll be up shortly. And of course, those nights. You sit up and you think, oh, just keep writing. He'll wake up. He never flipping wait. Anyway, I was exhausted. But I'm also one of those people, my personality was such that I saw the humour. And I don't know why, Sean, I still saw the goodness in people. Go figure. So I was always able to see the light, and
Because you've got such a beautiful spirit, Gloria, and a lot of people have been through these things. They end up completely broken people and get on drugs, and they live short, sad lives, unfortunately. But good grief, looking at the chat, tonight, everyone has just been unanimously supportive of you, saying how inspirational and brave you are. And what you've been through, nobody should be going through anything like that on this earth. And these evil perpetrators of these crimes, this is what we need to do, is to expose what's going on so we can get this stuff wiped out and raise public opinion to the level whereby they demand justice on these people, because we believe there's a misallocation of resources whereby they're going after low-level drug users and things like that to mass incarcerate young people, and it's the whole justice system's upside down. But we have run out of time. I absolutely salute you. It's been heartbreaking to hear what you went through, but necessary. And I'm going to urge the people who have just listened and been on this journey with you to go down and subscribe to your YouTube channel and support you on your socials. Do you want to just tell the viewers where they can find you and support you?
Yes, certainly. So, gloriamasters.com, there you'll find links to books, channels, podcasts, etc. The podcast that I run is called Handing the Shame Back. Isn't that great?
Yes.
So if you Google that, you'll find that, because we're handing the shame back even as we're speaking now. The other thing is the book I've written is called On Angel's Wings, My Flight from Trauma to Grace. Little bit of a warning. It is traumatizing, but there is hope, and I am writing my second book at the moment as a guide to help others out there. So you're never alone. I believe you. I stand with you.
And the hope is because of people like you, Gloria. So thank you very much for spending time with us this evening.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your day where it is where you are, because it's quite early, isn't it? So thank you again. Cheers.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. Oh my God. Every now and then we have a story on the channel whereby it just leaves you almost speechless, doesn't it? But what a brave woman. And, listening to what she went through, that whole almost 1 hour journey. Such a fantastic, eloquent speaker as well. So can you imagine her inner strength to get through that and to not, fall back on drugs and commit suicide, and like happens to so many people that end up in those situations. She's just a remarkably strong woman. It's just amazing, honestly, to listen to her. So yeah, thanks again so much, Gloria, and please support what she's the links down there as well. Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to bring Andrew in now because we're going to bring our next guest in. Let's bring Andrew in.
Hey mate, you all right?
Oh man, that was yeah. Oof. Very emotional, Andrew, to hear that and absorb everything. Yeah.
Do you take it on when you interview such emotional subjects?
God, I'm shook up. I'm really shook up right now. Can you imagine a 7? What was it? She said she was 6 or 7, getting transported to gangs and being forced to be in over 100 movies and things like that. It's absolutely sickening. Absolutely sickening that this goes on. But